If you love editing videos, but you're trying to get into After Effects, chances are you're probably really intimidated by this program. It's like a traditional NLE and Photoshop had a baby, but it looks different. There's all these different regions, a ton of keyframes. You can actually write programming into it. It's very confusing, super intimidating. And I know this personally because After Effects is the only program I've had any formal training on in my entire video production career. But this video, I'm going to show you 3 very basic techniques to get you started inside After Effects that 6 years later, I still use to this day. And if you stick around to the end, I'll show you how to combine them all in a way that creates very elegant text motion graphic reveals. Hey there, what's going on? Robert Teegarden here today. Again, we are talking about After Effects, the very basics of After Effects. I post content on a weekly basis on filmmaking tips and the business of being a creative. If that's something that you're into, stick around, see if you like this video, and maybe you want to, I don't know, maybe you want to hang out a little bit afterwards. So like I said in the beginning, After Effects is as if a non-linear editing program like DaVinci, Final Cut, Premiere Pro, and Photoshop had a baby, but it's like a mutant baby with extra fingers and all these different things, and you have all this stuff that you don't really understand what's going on, and it's kind of scary, it's kind of intimidating, but don't worry, we're gonna get through this thing together. Several years ago when I was first starting out in my professional video career, I took an After Effects course just so I could get the lay of the land and try to figure out what was going on. And I still implement and utilize some of the most basic fundamental principles in After Effects that I want to share with you today. So let's get started and I'll tell you what's going on. So here we are in After Effects, and I have this piece of stock footage that we're working on for a different project, but it's a great place to start because it doesn't really matter, and we're just gonna kind of animate some text across time to begin with. So, like I said, it seems a little interesting. There's all these different layers. They don't really look like video layers to begin with, but what we wanna do is 3 different properties that we wanna animate across time through a text layer, right? So this person just scored a goal. They scored a fake goal on a fake field with their fake friends and this fake video, and everything's fake, but what we're doing is not. So let's get started by adding our text layer. Now, if you go to the top of After Effects, you're gonna see this kind of toolbar that's up here. And when you hover over it with most things in Adobe properties, you'll start to see all of the names and the keyboard shortcuts. If you're a weirdo like me, then you don't really like to touch a mouse as much as possible, that you need in order to utilize that particular thing. Now, if I hit T, immediately what's gonna happen if you look down on our timeline is it's going to add a text layer when I click on the video. So the second I click on that video, now I have a text layer, this red default text layer that's here, and wherever I clicked is where it's going to go. Now, for the sake of this silly video, we're gonna say we scored a goal and we're excited, so we're gonna put an exclamation point at the end of it. And the first thing I want you guys to notice is that if I triple click here and I highlight all of them, or I hit Command A and highlight that whole layer, I have pixels over here that are going to enable me to enlarge this thing if I wanted to, right? So let's just say that that's the place that I want to put it. The other thing is I can start to work on my transform properties, which if I take this little caret down here, that's what it's called. Those are called carets. And I hit here and I go down to transform. I have all of these different properties that I can animate and move around, right? I can mess with them a little bit. And so the thing that I can do here that's going to be really easy for us is I can just kind of increase the scale. And something that I want you guys to notice is that you see how it's animating from the bottom center, and there's that little like interesting crosshair that's there. Well, if I actually press Y on my keyboard, I can start to move what is called the anchor point of this text layer around. So I can move it up here, and now look what happens when I start to move the scale. It's actually animating from the top, right? I can move this anchor point literally wherever I want to on that particular layer, and it'll start to animate itself from that point, right? So it's literally the point in which all of the animations are happening from, or the anchor point, right? And so if I want to be able to do that from here, the corner, from dead center, I can do that stuff as well. For the purpose of what we're doing right now and to keep things simple, I'm going to keep it down on the bottom center, but I wanted to show you what happens when I start to animate these things. Now, another thing that you can easily see is that it's not in the center, even with my safe grids on the side. So what I'm going to do is go down to this particular workspace. You're going to see a line, and it pops up, and I want to animate things horizontally, and I want to align them vertically. Not animate, I want to align them horizontally and vertically. And so now I have something that is perfectly in the center in terms of my text layer. That's great. Okay, so now we've got our setup going. Now let's talk about the first two properties that I want to show you how to animate, and they're all stemming from the transform section, okay? So the thing that I want to do is I want to make this layer get bigger, and I want it to fade in. Now, there's nothing that's simply just like a crossfade like there is in Premiere Pro or there is in any of these nonlinear editing programs. So I actually have to manually put that stuff in. And the way that you actually animate is you start to utilize these stopwatches right here, okay? These little clocks. And this isn't like a phone stopwatch. This is actually like if you're a track star and you're like click, 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 or like 60 minutes. That's what they're trying to emulate here. So in order to animate my scale property, I'm going to click on that stopwatch here, and I'm going to go across time. Let's say I go to 1 second, I go 24 frames forward, I go to 1 second, and now I'm going to click this add or remove keyframe at a current time. I'm going to click this, and it's going to put a keyframe exactly on the time or the playhead that I've got going on. Now this is a really important part of After Effects and probably one of the most different concepts relative to your animation software, your editing software, I should say, that we need to be aware of. Animations happen across time. They happen across frames. So adding and manipulating keyframes, or frames that are key, is really the biggest fundamental principle of After Effects and how it differs from your other editing software. So when you start to put in your keyframes and you're utilizing that stuff across time, that's really how you're communicating, or the basis of how you're communicating the language you use to communicate in After Effects, okay? So if I start here and my scale is at 173, but I want to skip to that next keyframe, which I just hit these little arrows over here, right? I can start to make this text layer get bigger. So now what you can see is that across time, up into one keyframe to the other, it scales up as he's Arsenio Hall. That's a throwback for some of you youngsters in there. You got to Google it, right? It's moving and animating across time, and that's fine. And that may be exactly what you need for the video that you're working on. But I think we could do something a little bit better. So let's go back to the beginning, and we'll have this fade in as it scales at the same time. So I'm going to hit my stopwatch on my opacity. I don't have another keyframe over here, but I want it to align exactly where my scale keyframe ends. So I'm going to go forward on my scale, and I'm going to add an opacity keyframe, right? But I don't want that animation to start there. I want it to end there. So I'm going to go all the way back, bring down my opacity, let's just say to 0, because we're going to be very aggressive on this thing. And now it starts at 0, but it ends at 100. So what you're going to see across time is not only is it going to scale now, but it's going to fade in at the same time. And here we go. Let's see that one more time. Boom. There you go. Okay. So that's pretty cool. And that scale and opacity, although very basic, the techniques that you're using are going to enable you to start to stack skill sets on top of one another. And even still, sometimes I use that very basic setup where I just scale and opacity all the time. And it's very simple, but it's effective. And sometimes that's exactly what the video needs. Let's move on to my second explanation. So we talked about our scale and opacity. The next thing I want to talk about is masks. Now, masks are a pretty amazing and powerful tool inside of After Effects. You might have played with masks in Premiere Pro or in DaVinci and kind of moving them across time. I utilize them a ton in Premiere when I'm doing like frame wipe reveals and those sorts of things, but they're much more powerful and a lot more dynamic in After Effects. And so you can do this in two different ways, especially we have definitely a rectangular layer here in the goal text. So I can go up here into the rectangle tool or the Q and just click on that here. And you can see I can literally just drag out a mask layer here as it's auto saving, right? And so now I've created this mask, and you'll notice that all 4 of these squares are solid, which means that if I click V on my keyboard and go to my selection tool, right? This thing over here on the far left-hand side, I can literally move this mask around wherever I want it to go. And right now the way that it's set up is that the mask on this text layer, the text layer is poking through, the mask is everything that's outside of it, right? So it's the stuff that's over here that's being hidden by the mask. So that's one way for us to create a mask. Another way is for us to literally draw it out using the pen tool or G on the keyboard. And so I can click on these things. If I shift click, it'll start to move in a direct line. And then I have the same sort of deal. I can hit my selection tool again, start to move things around. But what's interesting in this one is a little harder to see. But if I move it around, you can see that these handles right here are not solid as opposed to their counterpoints up here. And so when I go back and make this my magnification ratio pop up, I can fit this back into my screen. So now when I go back here, and what I'm moving is just the top portion rather than all four like I did previously. Now for this thing, I just want crisp, clean, rectangular lines on it. So what I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna animate this here, create our mask. A pink one's a little bit better. And you can see down here on my text layer that it created a mask immediately, and I can drop this little caret down and start to animate some of those properties as well. So what I'm going to do is, as it's scaling and going up, I'm going to actually reveal the mask and move it down. So I'm going to hit my timeline on mask path, because we're going to create a path across time for our mask. And I'm going to go forward, and I'm not going to do the whole thing, but it's going to get probably 3/4 of the way through. I'm going to make another keyframe. I'm going to hit V on my keyboard, and I'm going to actually move this mask down. And you go, Teegarden, why do you want to actually make it disappear? I don't want to make it disappear. I actually want it to start with nothing and for it to reveal itself down. And so what I'm going to do is actually invert the mask here. Or if I didn't want to invert the mask here, I could hit this drop down right here and go to subtract, and it would do the exact same thing. But a lot of times the default is add. So I just click invert and it flips it around. After Effects kind of knows what the very popular functionality of masks would be. The other thing I want to show you is that I can move this mask, because all four of my corners are highlighted. I can move this mask around wherever I wanted it to be, right? But let's say I wanted it to actually strictly stay in one particular plane. So if it was here and I wanted to move it exactly straight down, I don't want it to move horizontally across my screen, I can hit Shift and I can drag it down. And as much as I try to move, you can see that it's locked horizontally, but I can move it vertically up and down. Same thing if I hold Shift, click, and then, all right, click, Shift, and then start moving back and forth, right? I deselected the bottom two. It'll do the same thing. So that's another technique, is that you'll click on everything here, right? And hit click, Shift, and then start to move. It'll lock it vertically up and down. So what does that do? It means that as we start moving across time, I've animated the path of the mask to go down as we're scaling up and raising the opacity of the goal, right? So you can see that it ends there after the keyframe. And so now if we play that around like this, you can see that it does that exact same animation of moving around, scaling, revealing as a mask, and using opacity as a fade all at the same time. So that's tip number 2. Let's move on to tip number 3. My final tip, we're gonna start talking about positions. Now, position keyframe is exactly what you would think it is. It's your ability to move a layer across the screen or reposition a layer across the screen. Now, for this one, I'm actually going to deselect the scale so it's a little bit easier for us to see and move it around. And in my transform properties, I'm going to click position here. But here's another thing that we can do, right? Let's just say that I only wanted to look at the position keyframe. So I could click P with the layer select. I click P on my keyboard, and it brings up just the position. Not all of the transform properties, but just position. Well, I kind of want scale, and I kind of want opacity at the same time. So I hit Shift and S for scale, and Shift and T for opacity. Why T is opacity, I'm not really sure. Somebody, maybe if you know in the comments, you can let me know. But now I have just the 3 things that I want to animate across time. Now, a technique that I use all the time in my position keyframes is that I'll have the layer move up as the mask moves down, and we're animating that across time. So let's do that now. Let's go over here, and as that mask moves down, let's create a keyframe here. I'm gonna go back to the beginning, and let's say I'm just gonna move this all the way down to like here. And something cool that I wanna show you is that you see how we have this little dotted line? Well, that's actually the path that the object is going to follow. And you can keyframe that and make it all cool and swirly quirly if you want to. I'm literally just pulling it down, so it's going to move up as we're going across time. But that's how you can see what your mask path, or your layer path is doing as you move it across time. I'm going back to fit that in. And now what we should see is we don't have scale anymore because we declicked those things. We removed those keyframes, but we do have a position moving up as the mask is moving down, and it is fading in across time. Let's see what that looks like. Whoop, there we go. Whoop, there we go. So now we've had 3 basic techniques. We scale and opacity, we moved our masks around, and we added position. I guess if you take scale and opacity as 2 separate entities, we have 4 different techniques that we're utilizing across time. And again, these are very basic principles in terms of how you use keyframes, the basic transform properties that you can use to create more dynamic text layers and reveals in After Effects. Now, we haven't even gotten into some of the more basic things of how you create more kinetic motion graphics, utilizing Easy Ease and the graph editor and those sorts of things. So if this is something that you found really valuable, stay tuned, because we're going to make another video on how you can kind of further tune these things up with another basic but very fundamental techniques and how you kind of animate what those graphs look like. It's almost like speed ramping on footage, but you do it to your motion graphic layers. So with that in mind, ladies and germs, this is another video in the can. If you liked the video, then like the damn video. And if you haven't already, well, then hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for posting notifications, because it really does help this channel reach bigger audiences so that we can help more people and add more value. With that in mind, that's another Teegarden video in the can, ladies and germs. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching. Peace.